Welcome to News 2. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sandra Guman-Singh. Tonight, we have an election special as we look back on some of the top stories that were highlighted during the election season. The polls are closed, but this election cycle certainly had its moments. For one thing, early voting turnout doubled this year compared with the 2014 gubernatorial election. There were also some complaints about early voting ending earlier than what a new law required. But election officials said the recently passed legislation was unrealistic. News 2's April Knight has that story.
Voters flocked to election offices on Monday. It's the last day of early voting for this election cycle, and according to election officials, turnout so far has been high.
As of yesterday's report, in the St. Croix district, we had 1,362, 1,362. St. Thomas, we had 2,374, and on St. John, we had 119. We had a total of 3,855 persons that have voted early.
According to election supervisor Carolyn Fox, it could be because in the last election cycle, there were some problems that prevented the maximum turnout for early voting.
St. Croix was cancelled because of a court decision. St. John started late.
The early voting polls closed Monday evening. The election system will then gear up for the main event, the actual election day on November 8th. But at least one person thinks that early voting should not yet be over. Election board member candidate Harriet Mercer, in a press release on Tuesday, stated that election early voting should be finished the third day before the actual election. That brings it to November 5th. Mercer is referring to recently passed legislation that, according to Fox, is hard to execute. Time is definitely a factor in the early voting period being cut short.
3 days before an election is not when the supervisor gets an election ready. 3 days before an election, we need to be sitting and ready. I restricted it to 10 days, which is affordable for us, and again, still giving us a timeline to meet our requirement.
Fox said they're already in talks with the Senate to possibly amend the new law.
I already spoke to Senator Gittins, and they're going to need to amend the law because they need to amend it so we can implement it fully.
Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
Now, the actual number of early voters are as follows. The total number is 5,063 early voters territorially. On St. Croix, 1,816 people voted early. On St. Thomas, some 3,071 voters. And on St. John, 176 voters. The voting machines were also tested in the St. Thomas-St. John district. The testing of the Automark and the DS200 machines, which was utilized during the general election process, were completed on Wednesday, November 2nd. Well, during the general election, joint election board members had to make some tough decisions, including the reprinting of the general elections ballots when early voting was already in full swing. But even with the modification demanded by the VI Democratic Party, one board member insisted that the ballots were still in violation of the law. Here's more.
Election officials are backtracking on their position not to reprint the ballots for the general election. In an emergency board meeting on Tuesday, joint election board members voted to reprint the ballots after the Democratic Party complained that the current one does not have the party symbol next to the name of the candidate, as required by law. The decision comes while early voting is already in full swing. Early voters, including the ones who flocked the election system on Tuesday, are still using the original ballot. After some deliberation, election officials decided not to go with local printers, which were in the running to save time and money. Instead, they're ordering the modified ballots with the party symbol next to the candidates' names from ES&S. Some 14,800 ballots would be ordered for St. Thomas and St. John, and 13,200 for St. Croix at the cost of 30 cents per ballot. But even with the modifications, board member Carla Joseph said that the proposed new ballot still does not follow the law. She enumerated some violations, including the lack of candidates' pictures, which, according to other board members, is an outdated provision.
In addition, we also have in the law that states you should have a separate ballot for the federal contest, which is the delegate to Congress race, as well as for the Board of Elections and the Board of Education. We are still going contrary to what is written in law. And I am not going to support a ballot that isn't complying with the law.
Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
Well, coming up, we look back at two significant events during the 2016 primaries, the historic one-party primary election and the Republican Party's fight to get their candidates on the ballot. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this NEWS2 special. The primary elections this year was historic. For the first time, the Virgin Islands election system held primaries for just one party, the Virgin Islands Democratic Party. VI Republicans, of course, cried foul, saying they did everything that the election system asked. While some of them played it safe and filed for candidacy according to the deadline, other Republican candidates were set to be write-ins. Here's more.
VI Republicans are worried about the general election. They're saying that failure by election officials is putting most of their candidates at an unfair disadvantage.
I think the Republicans, I think we've been dealt, just a bad hand, a bad deal.
Last week, early voting for the primary elections began, but unlike in 2014, there was only one ballot, the one for Democrats. According to VI GOP State Chairman John Canigata, they did not receive the memo that parties needed to hold their own primaries until May 5th. When they finally did, the party immediately got together, he said, in a convention where they nominated congressional candidate Gordon Ackley and others. But they found out the election board would not accept that set of candidates for inclusion in the primary.
Everything was fine, and we thought it was accepted, and then they told us it was not accepted. They recognized the election of the chairman and national committee man and committee woman and the territorial committee members, but not the offices for, the offices like senator and board of election.
And Republicans can't write in their candidates in the primaries because, well, there's no ballot. But according to the election system, the fact of the matter is that the Republican Party did not submit their candidates on time.
They submitted a letter to the board and the supervisor office, and the board wrote them back and tell them that they're not accepting it. The board said it was late. We sent a letter to all parties back in December.
A few Republicans filed candidacy on their own, and their names will appear on the general election ballot. But for the majority who didn't, they might need to be write-ins in the November elections, a clear handicap according to Canigata.
And that puts us at a disadvantage. We're hoping that it doesn't come to that. We're hoping that something can be resolved where the ballots have not been written right now.
Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
And the primaries still went ahead in spite of that controversy, although with somewhat a low turnout. The polling sites during that primary weekend also showed the failure of an attempt at rewriting anti-electioneering laws. It sought to move campaigners further away from polling places, but that didn't quite work out. News2's April Knight was at the polls with this report.
The rollout of the new electioneering law didn't go quite as planned during the primaries on Saturday. The legislation, which took effect in April, mandated a 200-foot campaign-free radius around polling places. But on voting day, this was the scene. Senator Gene Ford, who opposed the law, is in favor of a smaller radius, saying he does not believe the 200 feet should be measured from the perimeter but from the walls. That's in spite of Joint Election Board Chairman Arturo Watlington saying the law is clear that it's from the boundary lines.
There's still some confusion in terms of where one can start doing some electioneering or not. As far as I am concerned, they're all in compliance. I visited the Gladys Abraham School, which I saw signs. I visited the Adelita Cancroin School, and I saw signs saying no electioneering beyond this point, and everybody seems to be in compliance.
The new electioneering law is part of a series of bills tied to election reform, which the Senate focused on with renewed energy right after the controversial and confusing 2014 elections. But the new rule didn't seem to make a difference on Saturday when campaigning abounded at the polls. There were the usual tents set up by ardent candidate supporters, the signs and placards waved around, a big sign on the wall right in front of the entrance to the polling site, and even pro-candidate t-shirts worn by many inside the polling places themselves. Whether or not these were illegal according to the new law remains unclear. Electioneering is not clearly defined in the VI code. Election officials said it was up to the police department to enforce the new rules, but the many police officers present on Saturday, at least in this polling place, did not kick out the campaigners. Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
Coming up next, the Virgin Islands Republican Party has been visible during this election cycle, and not always for the right reasons. We look back at the beginnings of the internal war within the VI GOP and the GIP newcomer who was at the root of it all. That's up next. Welcome back as we take a look back on the election season. 4 days after the Republican caucus in St. Croix, which happened at the Buccaneer Hotel on March 10th, some unsuccessful candidates were coming forward expressing concern about the integrity of the process being compromised. Among the allegations were ballot tampering and breaking caucus and Virgin Islands rules.
These 4 Republicans didn't say it outright, but newcomers freshly situated in the Virgin Islands might have manipulated the local Republican caucus.
My experience with John Yob, first time was through email when he was working for Rand Paul's campaign, and they were trying to set up a fundraiser here in St. Croix.
Here's what we know about top vote-getters John Yob and his wife Erica. They got the top spots out of 6 who get to go to the 2016 RNC. The Yobs, who were based in Michigan, wrote the book Chaos, a guide for influencing the upcoming contested convention.
I found it a particular interest to me as to why somebody who wrote a book like that would move here pretty suddenly before this election. And so then, more questions were asked, and I have no question that they have moved here. The question is when.
On March 4th, election supervisor Caroline Fox stated in a letter that Yob falsified residency dates to meet local eligibility requirements. Yob sued the election system, and a St. Croix judge issued a restraining order that put Yob back on the ballot. With the TRO, the residency issue is out for now. Still, there are other allegations against the newcomers.
I received a campaign letter. In that campaign letter, there was also an absentee ballot, a verification form, and also directions on how to complete an absentee ballot.
This set of instructions for filling out absentee ballots tells the voter to mail the ballot not to State Chair John Canigata, but to Lindsay Alon, one of the delegates elected on Thursday and also new to the territory.
I hope that when it all gets resolved and we get to the bottom of all these things, maybe they're misunderstandings, maybe there is nothing to these things, or maybe there are things.
Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
Well, shortly after that, the courts got involved. VI GOP State Chairman John Canigata disqualified the delegates elected on March 10th and replaced them with alternates. According to Canigata, the elected delegates did not respond on time that they're accepting their spots at the National Convention. John Yob, meanwhile, addressed his critics, defending his family's decision to move to St. John and the legitimacy of his VI campaign.
Our move to St. John had nothing to do with running for National Convention delegate. It's something we've been working on for a long time, and we bought a home here. Our children are in school here, and this is where we intend to spend the rest of our lives. I campaigned for the position on the basis of it being in the Virgin Islands' best interest to elect unaffiliated delegates to the National Convention. I campaigned hard. I put on parties in St. Croix. I put on parties in St. Thomas. I sent out mailing asking for folks' support, and I'm proud of the effort that we put forward.
Reporting for News 2.
We want to make sure that we gave them ample time to respond and say, yes, we are able to go to the convention in July. We want to go to the convention. They know the rules. They should have followed those rules and had that email over to us.
While the chaos did not end there, Yob's case created a deep and bitter rift within the Virgin Islands Republican Party. Some sided with Chairman Canegata, while others said he was abusing his power. The internal war eventually peaked during a controversial meeting held by the party, which featured an eviction of members from Canegata's property and an assault that drew police response. Here's more.
It was chaos at the first Territorial Republican Committee meeting on Saturday. Some members disagreed with what they called a dictatorship by State Chairman John Canegata.
It's an honor to have them.
The meeting was an opportunity for the Territorial Committee to settle once and for all who's actually going to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Canegata had disqualified the original elected slate and replaced them with alternates. The audio of Saturday's meeting appears to indicate Canegata refusing to recognize members, raising a point of order.
Gentlemen, you're out of order.
No, we're not out of order. He's not out of order. We're not out of order. You're out of order.
Some 10 minutes after the meeting began, Canegata adjourned and ordered everyone off his property.
Everybody out, turn out. Don't touch me. Take care.
And I'll file an ethical.
After that meeting, some accounts say member Gwen Brady was knocked against a wall by member Frederick Espinoza, but other accounts say it was Brady who started it. The VIPD had to get involved. A second meeting was held that same day, one that Canegata condemned as illegal under party rules. During the second meeting, attendees, led by Vice Chairman Herb Schoenbaum, adopted an agenda that included condemning Canegata as chairman.
A condemnation of the state chairman for improperly refusing to allow the meeting to be conducted in accordance with the rules, improperly attempting to adjourn without a vote.
With the August Republican National Convention looming, it seems the controversial VI-GOP delegate dispute is not ending anytime soon. Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
And the fight over which delegates will represent the VI-GOP was eventually resolved after the National Committee stepped in. Yob and the other originally elected delegates were seated at the convention. Well, coming up next, two candidates who fought for their place on the ballot. One successfully secured her spot, while the other was disqualified. We'll be back. Welcome back. One candidate tried to change the rules on who can run for office while holding on to their current seats. Election Board member Ivy Moses attempted a run for the Senate seat without giving her seat at the Board of Elections. Here's some of her unsuccessful fight to make that happen, as well as some data on voter registration.
The registration deadline is officially over. Election officials are still tallying up the latest number of registered voters. But as of September 30th, there were 45,768 registered voters in the VI, 22,034 on St. Croix, 21,950 on St. Thomas, and 1,784 on St. John. According to Fox, extending the deadline to October 9th increased the registered number of voters, but not by much.
The extended deadline that we had in both districts, we increased about 28 in the St. Croix district and about 30 additional persons registered in the St. Thomas district. We register each month, so it's not really a big thing. And in a month, what happened is we register each month.
But election prep is not the only thing demanding Fox's attention. Members of the election board went to the VI Supreme Court to appeal an earlier decision by the Superior Court. That case revolved around Ivy Moses, who wants to run for senator without resigning her post as election board member. Senators do it all the time, she said, but the court said no. Moses was since disqualified from the primaries. But according to Fox, even if the VI Supreme Court grants the appeal somehow, that might still not make a difference in the primaries, which already passed.
He's dealing with the law. We were following the law. So, if the law is wrong, then they'll correct the law going forward, but it can't be retroactive. The law is the law right now.
Reporting for News 2, I'm April Knight.
Meanwhile, the battle over Alicia Chucky Hansen's eligibility to run was over. A key court decision dealt a blow to the former senator's naysayers. Prior to that, she held a press conference indicating that she was filing a petition. Let's look back. Former Senator Alicia Hansen was removed from the general election ballot as a Senate candidate, a vote by the St. Croix Board of Elections citing inconsistencies in the use of her legal name.
And under Title 18, Section 492, Name of Candidate, it says, annotation, a candidate is not allowed to put both his name and a nickname on the election ballot, though one who has always been known by a nickname may use it instead of his given name.
The controversy whether Alicia Chucky Hansen, whose legal name is Alden Alicia Pickering, properly registered to vote and would be qualified a legitimate candidate, continues. Hansen says she is filing a petition against board member Adelbert Bryan.
I move the Board of Elections to order the recusal of Adelbert Bryan from taking part in any proceedings concerning Alicia Chucky Hansen based on long-standing animosity and bias against her. Adelbert Bryan has developed a long-standing bias against Senator Hansen as a result of her repeatedly pointing out to the public his history of illegal acts and receiving special treatment to escape prosecution. However, the major source of his bias is his knowledge that Senator Hansen is in possession of FBI reports that establish that Bryan, a former police officer, shot and killed his son with an illegal weapon stolen from the police department. I want to make sure everybody here where he went, all he's trying to do, he claimed that yesterday we are off the ballot. We'll see about that. Okay? We'll see about that.
And as you know, Alicia Chucky Hansen was on that ballot, and true to his word, Superior Court Judge Douglas Brady granted Hansen's request for declaratory judgment on her legal name. Election Supervisor Carolyn Fox went ahead with ordering the St. Croix ballots, about 16,000 of them. They also ordered 15,000. Well, that is all for this special edition. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this election wrap-up. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 7 p.m. for our regular newscast. I'm Sandra Gumansing. We'll see you next time.